Behind the dorm room doors and party lights, something darker lurks. These are three terrifying real stories from campus life. Stories they never wanted you to hear. It was the beginning of my first year at university. I had just unpacked my things and settled into my room when my family said goodbye and left. Later that same day, my roommate finally arrived, and from the very first moment, I realized he might be the most socially awkward person I'd ever encountered. I introduced myself as Dan and reached out to shake his hand. He hesitated, looked at my hand like he didn't quite know what to do, then let out a short laugh and said, "Oh," before giving me the weakest handshake I've ever received. I had to ask for his name because he didn't tell me. It was Dale. I attempted to make some small talk, but his replies were limited to yes or no, occasionally throwing in an uncomfortable smile or laugh. Within minutes, we were both silently sitting on our beds, each staring at our laptops. I was disappointed and already thinking about requesting a room change. Anyone would be better than Dale. At first, I thought he was just an odd guy. But it wasn't long before I discovered there was more to Dale than just awkwardness. I met a few people on my floor, and they seemed pretty cool, which was encouraging. That first evening, after walking around campus, I came back to find Dale still sitting in the exact same spot. I greeted him with a "What's up, Dale?" but didn't get a response. Not that I was surprised. It was 9:30 p.m., and I had no plans, so I turned off the lamp on my side and got into bed. I couldn't fall asleep right away, though. Dale was on his laptop until nearly 3 a.m. Once he finally shut it, I managed to fall asleep quickly. But then I woke up, maybe an hour later. The blinds in our room had been opened, and the moonlight lit up the space, just enough for me to clearly see Dale sitting on the edge of his bed, staring directly at me. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and asked, "Dale, what are you doing?" He whispered, "Sorry," and laid down. The next morning, he was already gone by the time I woke up. It was the first time I'd seen him leave the room. That Saturday was the beginning of orientation week, filled with tours and events. As our group passed the campus gardens, I heard some students ahead whisper, "What's that guy doing?" I looked, and it was Dale. He was sitting in the dirt behind some bushes, stroking the bark of a tree with his hand. The orientation leader didn't notice, or she probably would have stepped in. I didn't say anything, but I did tell the two students near me that he was my roommate. It helped spark a conversation, and eventually we laughed, awkwardly, unsure if it was okay. We ended up hanging out later that night, and I even learned that the school had assigned me a new roommate. Things were already looking up. That evening, when I got back to the dorm, Dale was sitting in the chair facing the door. I said, "Hey, what's up?" And he replied flatly, "Nothing." I sat down and opened my laptop, only to realize I'd forgotten to lock it. To my surprise, a lot of emails were opened. Some I was sure I hadn't read, and several folders had clearly been accessed. Dale had gone through my computer. When I asked him, he immediately and loudly said, "No," even before I finished the question. I knew he was lying, but I didn't want to escalate it. I figured I'd be gone by the next day anyway. That night, as I looked through my clothes to get into pajamas, it felt like everything had been moved around. I didn't say anything. I just wanted to sleep. But again, I woke up in the middle of the night, this time to the sound of a zipper. Dale was on the floor, going through my bag. I turned on the lamp and asked what he was doing. He claimed, "I think you have my toothbrush, by mistake." It was the most coherent thing he'd said. Still, I knew it was a lie. Something was seriously off with him. The next day, I met my new roommate. Same building. Much better vibe. That night, we chatted a bit. He wasn't the most outgoing. but still a major improvement over Dale. We turned off the lights and went to bed. For the third night in a row, I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange noise. It was a faint clicking sound, not steady, but repeating every 30 seconds or so. I got up to check, thinking maybe it was just a bag shifting or maybe a mouse. But as I listened closely, I realized the noise was coming from the other side of the door. The nightlight in the hallway was on, so when I looked through the peephole, I could see the top of someone's head. They were facing the door, head tilted down so I couldn't see their face. The clicking sound was coming from the doorknob. Someone was trying to get in. I immediately called campus police. They arrived in under 5 minutes, and only then did I feel safe opening the door. They had Dale in handcuffs. I told them everything, that he was my former roommate, that he had been going through my belongings, and that I'd changed rooms to get away from him. Now he was trying to break into my new dorm. They took him away. I never saw Dale again. He was either suspended or expelled. The rest of my college years were normal, but that creepy experience still lingers in my memory to this day. I spent 2 years studying at Binghamton University, and pretty quickly I found myself surrounded by a tight-knit group of friends. We made it a tradition to go out together every weekend. But one Friday night in October, when nothing major was planned, just me and 2 close friends decided to hang out at the nature preserve near the lake. There was a small clearing on the far side of the lake, perfect for starting a fire. It was hidden from the school and campus security, so on rare occasions, students would sneak out there to smoke, drink, or experiment with other substances. It wasn't a popular spot, and that's what made it appealing to us. That night, we brought some beers, lit a fire, and just chilled, having what we jokingly called a bro chat. As the evening went on, time flew by thanks to the alcohol, and eventually we were laughing so hard that one of my friends ended up rolling on the ground in the leaves. That's when my other friend suddenly hushed us. We all froze and listened. In the distance, we could hear leaves and twigs crunching. Immediately, we tossed our bottles into the lake. We were all underage and knew campus police sometimes patrolled the woods. We stuffed the rest of the drinks into a backpack. I was tipsy, which made me extra paranoid, and I wasn't the only one feeling that way. The fire made us an easy target for anyone passing through, but this spot was usually deserted. That's what made the next part so strange. It sounded like just one person out there. Then, a loud crack, a tree branch snapping nearby, made all of us jump. None of us were the confrontational type, so instead of yelling out, we just sat in silence, trying to listen. We heard someone, or something, walking around in a semicircle around our spot. It started to feel like we were in the Blair Witch Project. The constant snapping branches and rustling leaves surrounding us made it feel like we were being hunted. At first, we laughed nervously, but I was soon overwhelmed with fear. Suddenly, a loud thud made us all jolt. A branch had been thrown right into the center of our fire pit. I saw it happen, but my brain needed a second to register what I had just witnessed. One of my friends bolted immediately. The other and I just stared at each other, caught between laughing and panicking. Then, out of nowhere, he screamed. A second branch had hit him in the face. I grabbed the backpack, helped him up, and we took off running toward our dorm. Once we reached the road that divided the preserve from campus, we stopped, gasping for breath. But then, more footsteps. Someone was still following us. Without a word, we sprinted the rest of the way to our dorm. We burst into our friend's room and found him already there, safe. Looking out his window, we saw someone pacing along the edge of the woods. Whenever a car passed, they'd retreat into the trees. Eventually, they disappeared completely. and we never saw them again. We resumed our drinking in the dorm room, laughing about the whole thing. But by the next morning, the fear truly set in. None of us ever went back into the woods after dark again. This happened during my first week as a freshman at the University of Iowa. I had just started getting along with my new roommate. He was really committed to joining a fraternity, and Rush Week was set to start the following week. But the parties were already kicking off that Thursday. My roommate didn't want to attend alone. He said it would be harder to meet new people that way. So he asked me to come along. I agreed, even though I had no interest in joining a frat myself. Still, I planned on going to parties. After all, I was at a well-known party school. That Thursday, we were heading to one of the lowest-ranked frats, possibly even an unofficial one. His thinking was that if he didn't get a bid from the top houses, he'd have a backup. The house was far from campus, located in a rougher part of downtown. We pulled up to a corner house that looked nothing like a frat house. If it weren't for the loud music and the cars lined up outside, we would have kept driving. It seriously looked like they just moved into the first place they could afford. We knocked on the door and were greeted by a short, chubby guy in a sweaty white t-shirt holding a red Solo cup. He smiled and waved us inside. The party was in a poorly lit room packed with around 50 guys. It was sweltering in there. Worse, I only saw 2 girls the entire time, neither remotely attractive. I stayed for about 20 minutes, making small talk with a few antisocial heavyset foreign guys. Eventually, I gave my roommate a signal that I was ready to leave, but there was a crowd of guys blocking the exit. We decided to wait a bit longer to avoid looking rude. I kept drinking the cheap beer they were serving. I had 5 cups before I even started to feel a buzz. Then, a bigger guy came over, handed me a small bottle, and smirked, saying, "That'll get you wasted." I fake laughed and thanked him, hoping he'd leave. But he stayed, clearly waiting for me to drink it. So I did. It was probably 2 shots of some strong liquor. After that, he tried to chat, and every time I hinted I wanted to walk away, he'd pull me back into this one-sided conversation. Then things got fuzzy. My head spun, and everything started going dark. That was the last thing I remembered before waking up in a pitch-black room, lying in a bed. I could hear muffled music through the walls, so I knew I was still in the frat house. The room was really dark, but I could just make out some furniture and a small closet door. Suddenly, I heard the distinct crinkle of a plastic bag, like someone stepped on it, coming from inside the closet. That was enough. I bolted out of the room and ran downstairs back into the packed living room. I found my roommate and practically dragged him outside, past the group of guys still standing by the door. On the way back to campus, I told him I'd been drugged. He nearly called the police, but I stopped him. It felt pointless. Then he asked me something awkward. "Do you think anyone did anything to you?" I didn't feel sore. My clothes were still on, so I assumed nothing happened. When I checked the time, I realized I'd only been out for around 10 minutes. Whatever I was given must have been a weak dose. Thank God for that. That night remains the scariest experience I've ever had in college, all from attending some sketchy underground frat party